Well, I can tell you, having been campaigning in Exeter on Thursday and at the launch of the Stronger In campaign in Exeter on Thursday night, in Bristol yesterday and at a big Lib Dem event there, and here in Ipswich this morning, I am delighted to see so many of you here. And we are going to need you. We are going to need you because our country could be about to make the worst foreign policy blunder since King George III lost America over a tax on tea. That is where we are. I'm delighted that David Cameron has secured a deal. I may not have shared all of his concerns, but I recognize that many people in this country do. I think that deal will make it easier for him to bring a large chunk of the Conservative Party with him in fighting to keep us in the European Union. But even with that, I am not sure that we are not going to have one hell of a fight on our hands. I think a decision to pull out would be hugely damaging to British trade and the jobs and the wealth that it generates, damaging to our influence on the world stage, and threatening to the unity not just of the European Union, which is in a somewhat fragile state at the moment, but of the United Kingdom itself, because it is almost certain that Scotland and Northern Ireland will vote to stay in, and a vote in the rest of the country to pull out might just give Nicola Sturgeon her second referendum. And I think the risk is high because the British people know so very little about the European Union. Public perceptions have been poisoned by 30 years of anti-European propaganda in the newspapers owned by Rupert Murdoch, by Conrad Black, by Lord Rothermere, by 30 years of neocon propaganda in politics, which would have us believe that the European Union is some kind of socialist paradise. I mean, how many British people know, for example, that major successes in the British film industry, films like The King's Speech, were possible only because of European Union cultural funding support? How many people know of the huge investment in our research centres, in universities and elsewhere that comes from the European budget? Or that we have overtaken Germany as the #1 recipient of European science funding? How many people know that much of the road network, the bridges and so on that we have here in Suffolk come from European Union support because we are building trans-European networks to make trade so much easier and so much more efficient? How many know that low-cost airlines that keep places like Stansted Airport going are possible only because of policies agreed at European Union level? How many know that Britain, through its drive, has made the European Union the world's largest single donor of overseas development aid and the world's first continent major actor in the fight against climate change? We have a huge influence on the European Union through this country, and we are developing it as a force for good, promoting the values that all European countries share. But this is not known. How many people know that when Islamic terrorists put bombs on tube trains and buses in London, we were able to fly in blood supplies from right across the continent into our hospitals because of a European Union directive? How many people know that when Major Tim Peake went up into space last month, he went up not as a Brit, but because the European Union now has a larger space program than the United States of America? And we are part of the European Space Agency, which is what put Tim Peake into space. If we were outside the European Union, we could find ourselves outside all of those achievements, all of those programs. And when you actually look at Britain today, actually look at each community, look at the number of youngsters who will go to study abroad or to work abroad, look at the number of people who at some point in their career will work elsewhere in the European Union, who may buy property abroad, who may retire abroad, all thanks to European Union arrangements, and at the many others who come here and contribute to our economic growth in the process. Did you know that if you travel to any of the 50 countries where there is no UK embassy, you can go to any European Union embassy and get exactly the same level of support as you would get if there were a United Kingdom embassy? Not because you are British, but because Britain is part of the European Union. When have any of our newspapers reported any of this? What you will hear from the newspapers is how much it costs. Well, government is expensive. The European Union costs us between 0.5% and 1.5% of GDP, depending on how you calculate it. A heck of a lot less than most areas of government spending. You will read that Europe is corrupt and that the auditors never sign off the accounts. Well, actually, thanks to Liberal Democrat action in the European Parliament, sorting out what was a technical problem, the auditors have signed off the accounts for each of the last 6 years. Their reports are publicly available. They are debated every year in the European Parliament. And I think we have to go out and regain the argument about it being patriotic to be in the European Union. I don't know what your individual histories are, but I can tell you that both my grandfather and my father saw active military service on behalf of this country. But thanks to what their generation achieved in putting the cement of the European Union around the bricks of NATO, my generation has not had to go to war. And I think there is a very good case to be made for Europe being the patriotic alternative, an alternative to pulling the blankets over our heads and wishing the world would go away, to kind of opting out of our responsibility to work together with others to sort out the very major challenges that we face in the world in which we live. You know, our economy is stronger if we're together, thanks to freer trade. Our society is safer, thanks to police and judicial cooperation. Our environment is cleaner, thanks to commonly agreed standards, which people like Michael Gove would just love to scrap. And we have opportunities that were undreamt of by our parents' generations. You know, I don't know why we would choose to leave when English has finally ousted French as the language of European government. Go to Brussels, even the elevators speak English. I don't know why we would leave when we have a brilliant Frenchman running Arsenal Football Club, why we would take away his automatic rights to live and to work here, or why we would repatriate the Brit who runs the European Police Agency. I don't know why we would want to deny our fellow citizens the right to study, marry, work, retire, buy property, even seek hospital treatment in other countries of the European Union. Why put all of that at risk? Now, of course, the anti-Europeans will tell you, but we'd still be involved in all these things, because it would be in their interests to involve us. Yeah? Well, nearly 50% of our trade is with other European countries. About 5% of their total trade is with us. And if you want to see what happens, look what's just happening to Switzerland now. 2 years ago, they voted to come out of their cooperation agreement with the European Union, and they are already in serious difficulty in terms of investment and economic development. And I think we could find ourselves so easily like Switzerland, but without the bank deposits, and like Norway, but without the oil, outside the European Union. We would have to comply with all the regulations if we wanted to continue to trade. We would have to pay into the European Union Solidarity Fund, like the Norwegians do, for the privilege, almost exactly the same as we pay in at the moment. The UK is the 9th largest contributor per capita. Norway is the 10th largest contributor per capita. And we would have no say whatsoever over the laws that are set to govern that trade. You know, I'm sure that Jacob Rees-Mogg and others will talk about a land of hope and glory. I suspect it could be bargain basement Britain trying to undercut the Continentals in everything from workers' rights to environmental safety standards simply to stay afloat. And the main argument that's used by those who say, get out of the European Union, is about regaining control of our country. We are run by foreigners, they will tell us. Well, quite apart from the fact that we have massive influence in Brussels, pooling sovereignty is a fact of life if you want to achieve anything. And the question to put to them is this: if you are so worried about sovereignty, why are you not arguing that we should come out of NATO? NATO involves a far greater pooling of sovereignty than the European Union. There is nothing in the European Union treaties which obliges us to go to war on behalf of another country. And there is in the NATO treaty. I think we have a long way to go in this campaign. I think the biggest danger is complacency. Many people believe that just like in 1975, it'll be all right, people will come round. But in 1975, there were no rules on campaign finance. And the Yes campaign outspent the No campaign by a factor of 12 to 1. In 1975, every newspaper and all the broadcasters were arguing for us to stay in. In 1975, the continent was prosperous, calm, unthreatening. And in 1975, those who were undecided had relatively open minds. It looks very, very different now. And of course you can say, well, surely people wouldn't be so crazy as to put such huge national interests at risk. Well, national interests set the stage, but it's human emotions that determine the outcome. And remember Einstein. Einstein said there were only two things in life which were infinite: the universe and man's stupidity. And then he added, I'm not sure about the universe. You know, we must not allow the official in campaign to fight a negative campaign, concentrating only on the dangers of coming out. We mustn't allow them to fight a campaign only about how it is good for big business. We have to help them to craft a citizen's narrative. We have to identify in every community the key workers, the teachers, the nurses, the lorry drivers, who would not be there if we did not allow migration from the continent. We need to identify people whose businesses depend on trade with the continent, people who are involved in their day-to-day life with other parts of the European Union. And we as Liberal Democrats can help to do that. We can help motivate those who are already keen to listen to the argument, and working through a cross-party campaign, through Britain Stronger in Europe, we can try to help to persuade the doubters as well. And I have no doubt that if we are able to do that, it will be not only our party which benefits through the identification of many new supporters and members, but the country, because we will have had a proper debate with people about what being in the European Union means. Now, I am delighted to be here today in support of somebody who is doing a vast amount of work in this campaign, somebody who is putting every ounce of effort into it, and is not only flying our flag single-handedly in the European Parliament, but is running this campaign in the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, Catherine Bearder.